Good morning, and it's great to have this opportunity to speak about Swifts. And building for biodiversity is actually something really, I think, important, and the swift is the quintessential urban bird. So I'll just tell you my beginnings for working with the swift. We're at ATU Mayo. It was previously called GMIT. And so what happened there was that we put up the swift boxes on the first public building project in Ireland. We have cameras, we live stream, and we also now conduct research on that project. It was set up over 10 years ago. So my life has since, my life with swifts has grown legs, or should I say wings. So I now work a lot, and I work on a voluntary basis. So I should just explain that Swift Conservation Ireland is a volunteer forum to help people who want to help swifts. And hopefully in this talk, I'll show you, what you could do to help swifts. So the swift, it's a red-listed bird of conservation concern. So that means really that it has the most protection, if you like, that we can give a bird. They're in serious decline, but that doesn't mean that they have absolute protection. The nest site is only protected when the bird is actually in residence, and I'll speak about that a bit more. So they come to Ireland to breed, and that's a really, really important point, because they're only here from mid-April to the beginning of September each year, which may seem, they're just visiting here, because the rest of the year they spend in Africa. But they breed here and they don't breed there. So that means that this is their home, and we are the future of the species. So we need to ensure that we are providing the nesting habitat for swifts. They're totally faithful to their nest site and their partner. So when they have a nest site, and if they lose that nest site, they are basically homeless, and in most cases, they probably die before they ever find a replacement nest site. So I'm just mentioning those points just to get into our mind that this is a bird really that we need to, we need to be aware that they need our help. So I'm just starting off really just giving you a background picture. So the problem is that it's said that we've had about a 46% decline in the past 20 years. The Celtic tiger years were the worst years because we were doing a lot of building and we were losing a lot of nest sites without knowing that the nest sites were in the buildings. So putting on new fascia and soffit blocks off entrance holes to nest sites. Obviously, demolishing buildings, that's a complete loss of nest sites. Repointing stonework blocks off the entrances to nest sites. If you put up scaffolding for re-roofing or reworking on a building, that also, re-roofing is another one. But all of these things can be done, but we can help the swifts. And we just need to know what the formula is to help them, which is hopefully what I'll be able to put across in this presentation. So we can do two things. We can try and protect the existing nest sites if we know that swifts are nesting in a particular building. And that's the kind of, I don't know if I can work this pointer, but yeah, this one here, I'll talk about that project later. The swifts were nesting in those little holes there. And they were lost and basically reinstated. And then we can put nest boxes on the outside of buildings, which works, but it's a slower process and it's a little bit vulnerable unless you know that you're going to keep the boxes there for a long time. And then what I call the golden formula is to build nest boxes into new buildings. So in this project here, you'll see that's the Ballycroy National Park Visitor Centre. We put boxes on the outside of that building. And this is the Mary Robinson Centre in Ballina, where we've built nest boxes into the new building. So where I come into this is I'm based in County Mayo in Castlebar. That's where I started off my first Swift project. And what I realised was that it is quite hard to protect the what I call the traditional or natural nest sites. But if we can build in nest boxes into new buildings, or if we can put nest boxes on the outside of buildings, preferably public buildings, then we can actually help the swifts. So I've been working now since 2012 in Mayo, and we have actually now got, as of 2023, we've got a 31% increase in our occupied nest sites. So that means we've increased the breeding population in Mayo by 31%. So it's the only county at the moment with an increasing swift population. And so the formula that I have in the county is working, and I want to share that formula with everybody. What I'd want to do now is step back a little bit and just explain what a swift is and a little bit about the breeding biology so that you understand what's special about them. When I do talks for the general public, I call it the amazing swift. They've got an amazing lifestyle. They spend the majority of their life on the wing. The only time they land is when they have a nest site. So they're only land between mid-April to early September each year. So when they leave Ireland, they are going to fly for 24 hours a day, every day. And when a chick leaves the nest in Ireland, it will not reach breeding maturity until it's 2 or 3 years old. And that chick, once it leaves the nest, is going to fly for 24 hours a day until it finds its own nest site. So it could be flying pretty much non-stop for 2 or 3 years. And that takes my breath away. I don't know about yours. So they are an urban nesting bird at the moment. Over 90% of the swift nest sites occur in our towns and villages and cities. Kind of less so in cities because that's where a lot of development have been and a lot of nest sites have been lost. We call them hidden nesters because you will never see a swift's nest site from the outside. If you went into a building loft and could see the wall plate, you might see the remnants of the nest. There's no mess underneath the nest, so you won't be able to say, oh, look at all that mess there, the swift's here. That won't happen. The only way that we know if a swift is nesting in a building is if we see the bird enter the nest site. And that's what happens with surveying. You must see the swifts entering the nest site. So compared to swallows, house martins and sand martins, so swifts, swallows and martins, they look similar when they're flying, but they're not related. They're not in the same family at all. The swift's closest relative is the hummingbird, whereas the swallow and the martins, they're related. They're of the hirundine family. They've got something in common. They all go to Africa for the winter. And although they go to Africa for the winter, none of them breed there. So basically, all the migrating birds that come to Ireland, they come here to breed. They don't breed where they spend the winter. And that's something that we really must bear in mind when we're talking about conservation of migratory birds. Swallows and martins make mud nests. And the swallow's nest, they're called barn swallows. They would tend to make a mud nest in your outbuilding. And it's like a half a cup. You can see in the photo underneath the swallow. The chicks are lined up on the nest and you can see them, and there'll be a load of droppings underneath the nest. So that's the swallow. They have a white breast and they have a brown throat, and the males have long tail streamers. But if you look back at that swift picture, you'll see that it's all dark. It's a dark silhouette, and the only white on the swift is a little patch on the throat. The house martin builds a mud nest on the outside of the house, and it looks as if somebody stuck a coconut underneath the eaves. So it looks like a ball of mud, and there's one tiny entrance hole you can see here. So you won't ever see the chicks lined up like you do with the swallow. And they make a mess underneath the nest, and it's much to their demise because people often knock the nest down. But again, the swallow and the house martin are amber listed, which means that, again, we need to let them make their mud nests and make a mess because their species is in decline, not as much as the swift, but nevertheless there is a problem. And sand martins, they make their nests in riverside banks, quarry faces, and so on. So that's just a brief kind of outline of the difference in the species. The common swift comes to Ireland to breed. We're right on the edge of the breeding range. That red area is the breeding range. Over to the kind of east in China, it's actually a subspecies. So we have what's called the common swift, but it's a misnomer really, because it's no longer that common. The swift is red listed not only in Ireland, but in the UK, and is somewhat in decline right the way across its breeding range, mostly due to loss of nest sites with renovation of buildings. So they have just one brood, so they've only got one chance of breeding here, and they go down to southern Africa for the winter. So the route that they take to southern Africa, you'll see on the map here, they're going around West Africa, which is not what you'd think is the quickest route, and it isn't. But it's all about food, because when you're flying 24 hours a day, you need to feed a lot. So they are going over the route over Africa. If you fly over the Sahara, there's less insect food. So they actually take the route over Western Africa, and then the big yellow oval is the Congo, and there's a lot of feeding goes on there. There's a good sources of food. So, breeding. What we find is 90% in our buildings, they will go often in behind the fascia board, and they will then go just where rafters meet the wall. There's often a little alcove, and they'll make their insubstantial nest in that area. So I've found that often they're in buildings going from, you know, kind of 16th or 15th, 16th century, and then up to about the 1800s. Mid-1800s was very popular. So what you can see here, there's like a channel worn in the stonework, and this is where swifts have been going into the nest site for over 100 years. I mean, not the same swift, obviously, but once you have a swift nest site occupied, even if one of the pair dies, the pair will find a new mate. So basically, a swift nest site is occupied for generations. And these birds here are young swifts that are exploring for a nest site. And they've either watched an adult swift fly into there, and so they get the idea that this is how we find a nest site. We look for something similar to that. Or they can hear the swifts within the nest site, and they'll try and see if there's some way that they can get in to explore for nest sites. So they are in quite a lot of old castles. On the left there, the two of these are actually OPW sites. The left one is Kinloch Castle in County Mayo, and we've got 12 nest sites in there, and then on the right is Roscommon Castle. And you see how the swift there is getting into between, they get in between the stonework, and they'll find a hollow inside the wall where they can nest. So the vulnerability of that is that if the castles need to be secured and the buildings need to be repointed, unless there's been a survey done and you can identify exactly where those nest sites are, it would be quite easy to fill up those nest sites, and those birds would, as I said, they'd be homeless. So I mentioned they're almost permanently on the wing. They've got amazing aerodynamics. So they feed and drink on the wing, they mate on the wing, only landing for breeding, and they do not perch. You will never see a swift perching on a branch or on a roof. They have very short legs. They've evolved to fly, and what happens is that of their claws, all of their claws are facing forwards, so they don't have like the equivalent of a thumb, which would allow them to cling onto a branch. They don't have that. They collect all of their nest material whilst flying. They don't ever collect twigs, so if you found a nest in the roof of a building that was a whole lot of twigs, that wouldn't be a swift's nest. The swift's nest is like a ball of grass, mostly grass, feathers, anything that they can catch in the air, and sadly sometimes bits of plastic these days. So in Mayo, we find they like the Molinia grass from the bog. They bring that into the nest and they glue it all together with their saliva and to make a lovely bowl to put their eggs on, their eggs in. So because they're flying 24 hours a day, obviously they have to sleep. And the way that they do that is that when they go up to altitude, around 3,000 meters, and they close down half of their brain, and the other half of the brain allows them to keep in flight, and then they swap around. And the way we know that is because a Swedish guy who was working for the Air Force in Sweden managed to use some very fancy radar to watch a group of swifts going up in the evening. So I said that there's no droppings below the nest. So this is a nest site in Claremorris in County Mayo, and 3 nest sites in here, but not one dropping below there. All of my nest box projects, no droppings to tell you whether there are swifts present or not. And the reason there are no droppings, and I'm glad this is before lunch, is because this is a parent swift at my project in ATU Mayo, and the chicks are there. The parent has been in and it's fed the chicks, and now it's doing housework, and it's actually eating all of the droppings. So if any of you have rabbits, you'll know rabbits do the same. It's a way of recycling nutrients. But what it means is it keeps that whole nest space clean, and so it's why there are no droppings below the swift nest site. So they're insect feeders, and this is very important. We are on the western edge of the range of the swift. I've had a student doing research from the project in Mayo to see how successful can swifts rear their young when we're on the edge of their range. Isn't it better in the Mediterranean for them, you know, warmer climate and so on? But of course we have lots of midges, and swifts' preference is to eat the smaller insects, airborne spiders, midges, you know, that sort of thing. So what we find is that they do extremely well here, and the fledging of the chicks is well within the normal range, and we find that the feeding frequency equally equates with anywhere else in the breeding range. So what they do is, if any of you are interested in birds, you've probably noticed that swallows, you know, most insect feeding birds, they'll feed their chicks maybe 1 insect at a time. They'll come back, you know, with a daddy long leg or something, and they'll feed that. But swifts don't do that. They gather food into their throat. So you might see here and here, the throat is swollen. And it's because they've been collecting insects into what we call a bolus. And there's about 500 insects collected in each bolus. And it takes them about 45 minutes to an hour to collect that much food for the chicks. They then take that back to the chick, and the feeding process is fairly horrendous because it is, you see this here, that's the adult and this is the chick. So the chick basically attacks the adult when it comes in. So these are 2 fairly well-grown chicks. Here's the parent, and there you go. So I always think it's a bit like when I was a kid and my dad came home and I thought he had a Mars bar, I'd run up to him, you know, and attack him. So it's, the reason I'm showing you that is because it's actually a hell of a lot of work for swift parents. They are going to be doing this for 6 weeks. Okay, so most birds, they lay the eggs and they incubate the eggs for 3 weeks, and then they feed the chicks for 3 weeks, and the chicks fledge and they carry on feeding them for a week. But with swifts, they incubate the eggs for 3 weeks, but the process from hatching to fledging is 6 weeks. And the reason it's 6 weeks for chicks is because those chicks have to be fully fit, because when they leave the nest, the adult will not feed them again. They're on their own, so they have to be able to be fully grown, fully exercised, well fed. So it's actually an awful lot of work for the swift parents, and that's why they can only have 1 brood in the year. So they'll have between 1, 2 or 3 eggs, 3 being the maximum, and it's normally usually more 1 or 2 eggs. So you can see the building up of a population of swifts can be quite slow if you're only producing 1 or 2 chicks per nest. So I think so the faithfulness to the nest site and the partner is really key if the nest site is lost. Because if the nest site is lost for whatever reason, say the building's gone or the hole has been blocked off, they have to find a new nest site as a pair. Whereas what happens initially is one bird finds the nest site and then we'll go and find the mate and come back and they'll establish themselves in the nest site for 1 year. They'll build the nest. They'll only breed the year after that. So they're usually 4 years old before they have their first chicks, but they will breed until they're about 12 years old, all being well. So if they lose their nest site as an 8-year-old bird, that means that it could take them a year or 2 to find another nest site, and if they only live to 12, then actually, in reality, they're probably never going to find another nest site. Hence, the massive crash from the Celtic tiger years. So what I do about the kind of formula, if you like, that I have for helping swifts is around the type of nest box that's used. I prefer to use boxes made from woodcrete, which kind of almost ties in with the previous talks about it's a mixture of wood pulp and concrete. I've tried, there are lots of nest boxes on the market. They're just not all suitable. There are some plastic ones, there are magnesium oxide board, there are wooden ones, but we need something that's going to last as long as possible because those swifts are going to be nesting in there for generations. So, and our wet Irish climate is not easy. So there are 2 models here, there are 3 models, but by 2 companies that I have tended to use now for quite a long time. So this one here is made by a Dutch company called Vivara Pro, and as is this one here. So they are made out of this woodcrete. They're in the Netherlands, and the bottom box is made by a German company called Schwegler, this one here, and that comes in single cavity, double cavity, or triple cavity. And swifts are colonial nesters, so whenever you set up a nest box project, I say a minimum of six nest compartments. For 6 is a small colony. I'm showing you some projects in a short while. You can externally mount boxes, as in that bottom photo, but I much prefer the built-in, because if you externally mount a box on a building, it could be taken down at some future time. And that's not ideal. Whereas if you're building a nest box into a new wall, it's going to be there for the life of the building, which should hopefully be a very long time. There are a couple of key important things as well about swift nest boxes. The entrance hole size of the box is very important. 29 millimeters is good. 28 is also good. Smaller than 28 is too small for a swift, and above 30 will allow birds like starlings to go in, so we try not to have starlings in nest boxes, although the odd slim one does get in. And so that's also important because a lot of companies make nest boxes that don't have the right size entrance hole size. They don't have the right size cavity size either, or should I say nest compartment. What's important with swifts, and I'll show you a video in a moment, is that you have to have a compartment that will take 5 adult swifts, because when the chicks are full grown, they are as big as the adult, and they're going to be as big as the adult for the last 2 weeks that they're in the nest compartment, so between weeks 4 and 6. And the adults always sleep with the chicks at night. So at night time, you've got to have maximum 5 adult birds inside. Also, the swift chicks have to do exercising in their last 2 weeks. because they have to be very fit. So they do push-ups and all sorts of things in the nest box to build up their chest muscles, because when they leave their nest site, that's the only chance they've got. So they must be able to just fall out of the nest site and fly away. If they land on the ground, they're doomed. They cannot take off from the ground in the majority of cases. The nest sites have to be 4.5 meters or more. So that's another reason why they have to be able to fly away and jump. It's like somebody jumping off a cliff with a hang glider. And that's 4.5 meters above a flat surface. So that can be either the ground, or it can be, say, if there's a flat roof below it, must be 4.5 meters from there. And it's because they need to drop down before they lift off. We don't want nest boxes near big plate glass windows, because the exploring swifts, which are called screaming parties, they could collide with the glass. You can get something called Pilkington K glass, which helps prevent bird strike. We don't want big spotlights putting glare into the eyes. So there's a few key things that you must remember when you're locating a swift nest box project. So this is a swift chick exercising. So this is the compartment of a Schwegler 17A, the one that I showed you that's a triple box. So that chick is fully stretched out, and the wing, when they're fully stretched out, is about 32 centimeters. So that's what we want, a compartment that's going to be 32 centimeters long at least, to allow them to have that full exercising space, so that when they want to leave the nest site, they're going to fly off successfully. Okay. I now want to just talk about a few projects that I've been involved with, just to give you an idea of some of the things that are possible. This is a building in Sligo. It was called Lyons Mill, and a Lidl was being built on the site, so the arrangement was that they could build a Lidl, but they would need to renovate the mill. But sadly, no survey had been carried out on the mill building to see if swifts were nesting there. And you can only survey in the season when the swifts are here, because you have to see them go in. So an ecologist was passing one day, and he saw what you're going to see now. You see that bird fly up there? That's a swift trying to get into its nest site. And then another one arrives in a moment. There's another one trying to get into his nest site. So they were doing that for the whole year, for the whole season, you know, the whole swift season. But it wasn't all a sad story, because the ecologist contacted me, and we spoke to National Parks and the development company, and we came up with a solution. Although we didn't know exactly where the swifts were nesting, I know roughly where swifts might be nesting. So we got over 20 of these entrances. They're made by a group in the UK called Action for Swifts, but you could easily make them. I have the 3D design. That gives you an entrance exactly the size that a swift would want, and we located it so that where the rafters were meeting the wall plate, that would take them into that cavity space. I'm sorry if I'm not using the right wording, but hopefully you know what I'm talking about. But there's a key element to every swift project, and that is the attraction call. And so the attraction call is to help a bird find a small hole that's only, 29 by 65. I already explained to you how swifts find the nest site. They either find it by watching another bird enter a nest site, and that gives them a visual cue as to where a nest site might be. And then the other way they find them is to hear swifts within a nest site. So we use the attraction call, and we locate the speaker near the nest site entrance to teach them to look for that hole. So once they do, when the swifts start to fly near to this, the entrance hole was there. So they'll come towards the sound, and then they will start to look for a cavity near the speaker. And within 2 years, we had swifts nesting in there. Now, it may not be the swifts that have been made homeless. It may have been new young birds looking for a site. But the point is that that building does still have swifts. Attraction calls may put fear into people's minds about, oh God, the noise. But you shouldn't play the call loud. It should be low, because the call then is not distorted, and also it focuses them on that sound. If it's too loud, they can't focus on the location. The other thing is that once you have swifts, once swifts have found the nest sites, then you can stop playing the call, because once you have resident swifts, other swifts will follow those resident swifts, so it will become its own project. So I have to acknowledge the support of the architects in Mayo County Council and the Heritage Officer and so on for really supporting the ventures. This is the second built-in project we did in Mayo, and I think the second in Ireland. 23 nest compartments were built into this new swimming pool. So they're on this wall here and that wall there. The call is this little box here. They could have built the speaker into the wall, but they preferred to just put it in a waterproof box. This year, which is, 23, so 4 years on, 21 of the 23 compartments has breeding swifts in. So what I have found is that the swifts prefer the hole in the wall rather than the nest box sticking out from the wall. They're much used to finding a hole in a wall than a thing sticking out from a wall. So this year I have had another project, which is the first year of turning the call on, and within 6 weeks we had swifts going in. This was at a school project. So with the built-in projects, my own focus is public buildings. So schools are a great location because they help raise awareness. So any public building helps raise awareness. And the model of box used in this project is the Schwegler, the German-made. So this is another project using the Schwegler, but slightly different. This is Edgeworth Town Library, and they externally insulated that building. So what they were able to do is just cut out the shape for the nest box and slot the nest box into the external insulation. And the call for this project is being played from a speaker just placed on top of that overhang. And each call system, I'll show you in a while, has an amplifier which needs to go inside. So all that you need outside is the speaker. And this is the Mary Robinson Centre in Ballina. And again, you see with this one, what I recommend with the Schwegler is that a lintel is placed over the top, because although the Schwegler, it's made of woodcrete and it's very durable. My ones in the college at Castlebar that have the cameras, they're there now for over 12 years and they're fine. But the wall of this box is only, I think it's 5 millimeters. Whereas the other box, the single box, that's made by Vivara, is actually very thick. I wanted to bring one today, but it was just too heavy. I couldn't manage it. So either work very well, and in Mayo County Council, they prefer to use the Schwegler. So I just wanted to also talk about this project. This is a saving a site. So this is TCD, and there had been swifts in this museum building, and it was kind of along here, all these little alcoves. But they had that building surrounded by scaffolding for at least 2 years, and nobody had really was doing swift conservation work at the time, and all the swifts that were nesting there couldn't use the nest sites, and their knowledge of the nest sites was lost. And in 2019, I was approached by a student there and saying he'd like to try and bring them back into those alcoves. because there'd been some discussion about it. So the solution was that they would go up with a cherry picker, they would make sure that there was no rubble left over from the previous work in those alcoves, so make sure they were all clean, and then put a caul as near as we could to the holes. And within the first year, we had Swifts exploring. And then we had Swifts in residence, but they needed to go back and do more work on the roof. But of course, they needed to do that in summer when the Swifts are here, and that's always the problem, that Swifts are here from mid-April to September when the weather's good and we want to do building work. So what we did was we came up with a system for the scaffolding that would mean that the birds would have free flight. They have to have free flight in and out because they can't land and perch and pop in the nest site. And it worked a treat. The birds carried on breeding. And this video is just showing you gosh, that was quite quick. I'll try and go back. I don't know if but if you just watch, you might see, there we go, whoop. So it's great, that's, but we had to teach the Swifts where those sites were again because the history had been lost. Am I okay for time so far? Yeah. So this was another project with, I don't know if any of you know Taylor Architects in Castlebar, and this was an NUIG. We're turning this chapel in Castlebar into an educational facility for students. I had surveyed that building, so I knew all the nest sites where they were, and this is quite important if you survey to try and be as accurate as possible about where the birds are entering. So I think there were 9 Swifts nesting in this building. And so, my picture's upside down. I don't know how that happened. But anyway, basically, the Swifts were going into, again, behind the fascia board and into that space between the rafters. So what we agreed with Taylor Architects is I would give them the shape of the entrance, and they would make sure that in every place where I'd marked there's an entrance, they would look for the nest when they took the roof off, and then they would also make the entrance for the birds. So the birds would have their then entrance when they came back. They were doing this work in summer. So although Swifts are red listed, there's no absolute protection for that nest site. So they had already put up the scaffolding well before the Swifts returned, so there was nothing to stop them from working on this building. But because we came up with this solution, they also made some extra nests as well to compensate, so we ended up with, I think it was 15 nest site entrances. They finished the work before the Swifts had left, and they took down the scaffolding, and lo and behold, the Swifts went in, because every day they were trying to get in anyway. So that worked as well. So it is possible, but it's hard protecting the natural nest sites. So building in new nest sites is the long-term secure future for Swifts. So just a couple more projects just so you can see. This is the woodstone box that's made in the Netherlands. This is Crossmolina Fire Station. The speaker embedded in the wall. So they decided they wanted to leave the boxes exposed as a kind of feature. And we had Swifts exploring that within the first season. This is the first project in Ireland for building in. This is Westport Town Hall that we did with Mayo County Council. All of those, we only put in 12, which I regretted. It wasn't enough, which is why we did 23 at the swimming pool. Here, all of those are occupied now, and they have been for years. And then this is a new project using the woodstone. This is a secondary school in Ballina, and it was year 2 this year, and 3 of the 24 boxes occupied. And the speaker there, they decided to mount it in a waterproof box on the exterior. So long as the speaker is near the nest site entrances to help focus the attention of the Swifts, that's key. If you don't play attraction calls, the chances of a Swift finding a little hole in a building without some help is really small. Okay, so I talked about the attraction call. These are some options. There's this one where you can get a waterproof speaker and mount it in a waterproof box. This is one made in the UK where it's a moulded waterproof speaker. Their amplifier is small like this, and there's another model of amplifier. And if any of you want to do a project, you'll see there's a booklet on your table with information. You can always email me. With this one, we were building the speaker in to the building. I've kind of mentioned this, but why we should help swifts is because we are the future of the species. They breed here and they don't breed in Africa. So if we can't help them, you know, it's very sad. So we have to help them. They're a very important part of urban biodiversity. Building for biodiversity, I know we've been talking about, you know, carbon, you know, reducing carbon and footprint and so on. We should also be helping biodiversity because it's for the health of humankind as well. Our buildings seem to be focused all about human use, but in fact we should be thinking about use for a wide range of biodiversity. We can't live without it. And swifts have been around for 49 million years. And personally, I don't want to see them disappear under my my watch. So there are some booklets on the table, there's a YouTube channel, there's a website, and I'm happy to help anyone by email or phone call, whatever. Thank you very much.